Hi everyone, thanks for watching. If you enjoy our shows, please like our videos and subscribe to our channel. And remember to hit the bell for notifications. And you can support us via PayPal, Patreon, Bitcoin, and through our website, ageoftruth.tv.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Age of Truth TV. I'm Lucas Alexander in Copenhagen, Denmark. It's the 6th of March 2020, and our guest today is the inventor of email, a world-renowned systems scientist, inventor and entrepreneur who holds 4 degrees from MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He is now running for United States Senate from Massachusetts and speaking out on many controversial topics such as climate change, GMO, vaccines, nationalism, and science and academia fraud. Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai. Good evening from Copenhagen, Denmark, and good afternoon to you, Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai, or Ayyadurai, joining us from Boston, Massachusetts. Welcome to the show, and thank you very much for being with us.
Great to be here. Thank you.
We have many topics to discuss with Dr. Shiva on the show today. The inventor of email, such as the coronavirus, GMO, vaccines, 5G, climate change, and you running for Senate. We are now in March 2020, and since January this year, the hot topic in the mainstream media is, of course, the spread and the outbreak of the coronavirus in Wuhan, China. But is it as dangerous as we are led to believe? What is the real truth here? Are we being fed lies through the mainstream media, or are they telling us the truth about how dangerous the coronavirus is? How did this coronavirus originate? Was it from bats and snakes and whatever they eat in China? Or is it actually an orchestrated agenda, an elitist agenda, a man-made lab virus spread and implemented on purpose? And for what purpose?
Yeah, so, one of the ways to look at things, like when you do particle physics, right? You're essentially, it's hard to understand exactly what's taking place, the origin of things, but you look at the end output, right? These, physical manifestations, and you try to put together the puzzle pieces, right? In this case, let's take a couple of facts, okay? So we don't go to conjectures, and see if we can connect these facts in some rational way. So one is, you have the fact Hong Kong was blowing up for the Chinese, right? Remember, demonstration, people are on the street, the movement is building for freedom in Hong Kong, right? Whether you can call it the US incented it, whatever, but there was a massive protest in Hong Kong. The second thing a lot of people do not know is that in Wuhan, the main city where the coronavirus was, found, quote unquote found, right? Which is in the Hubei province. 6 months before this, there were massive protests in Wuhan. I don't know if you're familiar with this. Massive protests. Why? Because the Chinese people aren't they're like every people. We want to live well. We want clean air, clean water, clean food. China has been polluting its people, has been devastating its infrastructure. There's cancer cities. They use their people like slaves, okay? And the Chinese people have had enough of that. Within China, there have been many anti-pollution protests because China has so much garbage, plastic, they don't know what to do with it. So they started building big incinerator plants. In Wuhan, there was a plan to build one of the largest, if not the largest, incinerator plant for all of China. that incinerator's plant would have spewed so much sulfur dioxide, all sorts of chemicals, and the people in Wuhan had enough. And even many of the mainstream publications reported that there were massive protests in June and July. And prior to that, thousands of people, not thousands, tens of thousands of people are out there getting brutally attacked by the police. It was getting so bad that I believe these people are starting to win, that the Chinese officials backed off and they said, okay, we're not going to build that plant. Now, that's the last news you hear around July 11th, okay? It's sort of interesting. These protests just go away. And so you have that, and they probably may have continued, because if you see some of the people getting beaten in Wuhan, they don't look sick.
Some people speculate that some of those videos that came out from there are in fact crisis actors. What are your thoughts on that? Could that be so?
I don't know. All I can say is that it was a fact that China has been polluting the hell out of its people. This is undeniable.
Yeah, and they also talk about that they actually rolled out 5G there, and that could have actually triggered the virus.
Yeah, I have to study 5G. I don't know enough about it. But what I can tell you is there were protests in Wuhan, protests in Hong Kong, and in the United States, there's been a growing movement, what they call the quote unquote anti-vaccine movement, where people said, look, I don't want my kids to get vaccinated. I want to be able to control. That's between the doctor and me.
Because they're trying to push mandatory vaccines on the population because of the coronavirus?
Well, what I'm trying to say is I'm just giving you the data points. If you can go look at this. Hong Kong in China, Wuhan protests, and in the United States has been I led one of the biggest protests in New Jersey, okay, where we actually ended up winning. We scared the hell out of the lawmakers that they chose not to vote on the vaccine bill. And that was right, I think, a week before the coronavirus outbreak. And everyone was so inspired by the speech I gave there, by what happened there, and the growing anti-vaccine movement, which is really not anti-vax. In my view, it's really about truth, freedom, and health, okay?
And supposedly they already had a vaccine ready for the coronavirus by 2017.
Yeah, I mean, look, vaccines aren't that hard to develop, particularly when they don't even need regulations. They don't even need safety testing like pharma drugs, right? So you can make anything and put it out there. The bigger issue here is that, first of all, whether it's a coronavirus or any virus, let's look at the reality again, the facts. If you look in France, I think 4 people have died, okay? If you look at the entire population, 11 million people in Wuhan, and let's say you attribute all the 80,000, whatever the number is, to Wuhan, and you even say all those people died there, it's a minuscule amount. We have trillions of viruses around us, within us, outside of us, trillions of bacteria. The issue is the people who are dying are people, 95, 98% of them are people who are smokers, have other health issues, pre-existing conditions. They're basically unhealthy, immunocompromised people.
Or maybe over 70, they talk about.
Over 70. And so when the virus comes into you, in the natural course, your body upregulates, in a natural choreography, and you may have some mild symptoms when your body gets stronger, okay? However, in sick people or people's immune systems are compromised, the body goes haywire. It's called a cytokine storm, and doesn't modulate the immune system in its beautiful ebbs and flows. And it's the reaction of the body that causes these different respiratory issues or whatever the manifestations of the thing. It's not the virus. It's a reaction of the body's unfettered immune system or imbalanced immune system. So the question really is, how do you protect your immune system? How do you make a resilient immune system? That's really the question. 230,000 people die of not enough vitamin A. 1.7 million people die every year without enough access to vegetables. 4.7 million people die worldwide from lung pollution, right? This has been going on forever. But why is there so much focus on this? And that focus, we don't hear about Hong Kong anymore, in fact.
Why so much focus on the coronavirus, you think?
Yeah, why is there so much focus? Why aren't we talking about how do we increase immune health? Because the end result is we're telling people now to stay off the street, shut down schools, potentially go to a cashless society. People are talking about that. People are talking about, okay, we need vaccines, okay? And this is at the heels of when one of the biggest movements that we won in New Jersey took place. So when I put all the dots together, these are all facts that I've shared without conjectures. What I see is, A, no one's talking about immune health. Vitamin A protects your cells, okay? Vitamin D and C protect the immunomodulation. Well, where do you get this stuff? From good food, good nutrition, clean air, clean water, clean food. The politicians have created dirty air, dirty water, dirty food. They don't want to talk about that. They rather create a fake problem and then a fake solution so they never have to address the fundamental issues of they're destroying the infrastructure of most major places, they're destroying the water systems, and they're destroying the food supply through big ag. That's what's really going on. So these are essential facts without even jumping to conjectures. Massachusetts, for example, got an F minus. This is a center where MIT is. An F minus in infrastructure, a D plus in corruption, okay? Or if you flip it the other way, an A plus in corruption, okay? So we're living in supposedly the most elite place for Harvard and MIT are, and yet it's the most corrupt and the infrastructure is crumbling. What does that tell you? That tells you and everyone listening that the elites, the 0.01%, the wealthier are getting much wealthier, and working people, I'm not talking about people who do not work. Marx called them the lumpen proletariat. Okay, I'm talking about people who do work, their income levels are going down massively. We've created an environment where money is not tied to labor anymore. It's tied to something ephemeral, right? That doesn't really exist, what you call inflation. So they created a situation where they must create fake problems to fake solutions because they cannot create real problems or real solutions because of their corruption. That's what's taken place. And so a guy like me running is a huge opportunity because it gives an opportunity for people to see what they deserve, right? What people have in this process, the elites have forced people to lower their standard and lower it because they know that one day, at one time, I was in Africa, right? When you go to Africa, it's quite fascinating. You look around and you see the monkeys and you see all these animals, and you realize, Jesus Christ, we were out there at one time, with leeches and things, and we made it out of the jungles to slums and slums to this. So the elites, I believe, know something that, we can keep lowering the standards of these people. Okay, one day we'll put them in this, then we'll put them. They don't care. One day they'll be shitting outside because they know that as you lower people's standards, people get used to that. People are creatures of habit. So the fascinating question I have is, how low will they go to the standard? So they will live in their Elysiums, and we will live in probably shitholes, okay?
So Shiva, what are your thoughts on Bill Gates and how he could possibly be involved in all of this? He's been pushing vaccines and talking about vaccines and vaccinations for many, many years. But in a report, I believe it was the United States patent application publication, something called Event 201, taking place in New York City on October 18, 2019, a high-level pandemic simulation exercise of the coronavirus, which took place 6 weeks before or more before the actual outbreak in Wuhan, China. This was hosted by the Johns Hopkins Center and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So it appears that he is in the know, or part of it, or is this just speculation? Why do you think such a simulation event actually took place before it actually broke out?
Well, what I do know is Africa is the next big frontier. Bill Gates, a bunch of billionaires have been going there and buying up lots and lots of land, and it's not to help the Africans. They're not solving malaria to help the Africans. They're solving malaria so they could go there and live there, okay? The malaria nets that they give actually poison the environment there. Many of the natives there are starting to use them for actually fishing nets, okay? And remember, Africans lived quite, they had a huge biodiversity long before these neo-missionaries came there trying to help them. And they've destroyed the agricultural base of many of these countries by giving them essentially 3 crops to grow, right? Soy.
But Bill Gates have been talking about vaccines, and he also talked about we being too many people on the planet, depopulation.
Yeah, so what we do know about Bill Gates is, he's trying to pretend or promote himself as a big genius now. He didn't create DOS. He stole it from another kid, paid him nothing, and essentially resold it. So he never wrote the first operating system, which was a basis of Microsoft.
Really?
No, he didn't. So that's what I'm wondering. People ask me whether I invented email, but no one questions this guy. Did you invent DOS? No, he didn't. he was basically at the right place at the right time because his mother was on the board of United Way. She was sitting, she knew the head of IBM. Her son was programming, and IBM said, oh, we're looking for an operating system. He knew some kid, I think in Seattle, who wrote it. He bought it from him and then sold it to IBM, okay? So he didn't really write it, okay? But no one questions it because he has a gazillion dollars. People will question whether I invented email because I don't have a gazillion dollars. I made a lot of money other ways. And the reason is because the copyright laws, going back to that, because the people in Congress were 15 years behind. It took them until 1994 to see the software should be patented, you see? So the point here is, at a very deep level, you take a guy like Bill Gates, he actually thinks he's better than everyone, okay? His wife, Melinda Gates, I remember many years ago, a friend of mine who had a friend go to Harvard Business School and was in the class with Melinda, and apparently she said to this woman that, I'm not gonna marry anyone unless they're $50 million in net worth, okay?
Wow.
This entire thing is a set of people who care about one thing, the almighty dollar, and that's it, okay? And so Gates always talked about, he should have got himself a publicist, and that's what he's doing. He's putting out movies about himself, trying to create his legacy as some super genius.
But do you think they knew about the coronavirus before talking about vaccines?
Well, it's what is known as fact is the Gates Foundation is a big pusher of vaccines, right? They push vaccines all day long. They had invested in various foundations, which one of them, coronavirus is a broad class of viruses. One of the Pirbright Institute, for example, had gotten a patent on one of the coronaviruses. It's a form of viruses based on the protein shape. But I can tell you, once you do a patent that's in a very focused area, it's not that easy once you've already done that to get it into another area, okay? But so we know that you have the Gates Foundation, which thinks they're the neo-missionaries, going into places and telling everyone what to do. And that's what Bill Gates has done, and vaccines being one of his big portfolios, right? That's the way you cure and heal people. That's the only way, in fact, that, from his wave of infectious diseases, he's now doing toilets because he recognizes that the real way infectious diseases were fought was through sanitation.
And you do not recommend that people take vaccines and give their infant babies vaccinations?
I'm not here to recommend or unrecommend, but I'm here to point out the fact that real health comes by recognizing certain principles. One of those principles is one size does not fit all. Second principle is that, we live in a time of precision and personalized medicine. What's good for you may not be good for me.
But there's a lot of toxic ingredients in this, and they even talk about baby fetuses.
Right. So one of the important things is that's why the 1962 vaccination program was implemented by John Kennedy based on a very, very early understanding of the immune system.
And it was also linked to a cancer study, right?
Yeah, at that time. But by 1986, people were starting to be injured. People were suing the vaccine manufacturers. And his brother, Ted Kennedy, instead of repealing it, pushed a Band-Aid law through called the National Vaccine Injury Program, which essentially created a vaccine court where you could no longer sue vaccine manufacturers in legitimate court. It was a separate court, and liability was limited. For example, if your child died, only to $250,000. That was brought to you by another Kennedy. And instead of repealing it, that's what they did. And then people started saying, wait a minute, I don't want to get vaccinated. So instead of having a big outcry, they gave exemptions, religious exemptions and medical exemptions. And people like Bobby Kennedy, who in many ways, he's a complete charlatan. He promotes himself as though he's a fighter against vaccines, but he's the one who endorsed Hillary Clinton, who's a vaccine queen.
Yes, but Donald Trump funded Hillary Clinton back in 2008, right? Millions of dollars.
Yeah, but I'm saying, but Donald Trump never said whether, he's never said he's rabidly against vaccines. But
don't you think they're just in on it, all of them? You said, oh, it's funny to talk about the Illuminati, but you do talk about the 1%. Don't you think you have to be part of a New World Order strategy plan in order to even get to that point of becoming president?
Here's my view on this, right? People try to think this is monolithic, and these people, look, I've been around these people when I was out in Hollywood, living in New York. it's a little more implicit. You see, what's more, it's not like people are saying, we're going to do this, this, and it's more an understanding. You see, it's like an organism, okay?
But there are a lot of secret meetings, like the Bilderberg Group meeting since 1954, Trilateral Commission, Club of Rome, and all of that.
Yeah, I've never been to any of this, but what I can tell you is it's more of an understanding. You're in the club or you're not in the club. And when you're in the club, you behave a certain way. And it's like more decisions are done, quote unquote, telepathically, okay? Meaning there's an understanding, okay?
And we don't really know what goes on in that something 0.1%.
Right, but we know what we do know, because let's look at what we do know. We don't need to go into suppositions. What we do know, something very clearly, is the following, okay? That in 1970, a decision was made with Saudi Arabia by the elites in the United States and others to force everyone in the world to buy oil from Saudi Arabia using the currency called the US dollar, which was hyperinflating prior to that, okay? And if you go to that essential point that the entire world is energy system must rely on oil, which must be bought in US currency. Forget even the petrodollar. I'm just talking about the fact that this was a military relationship that was created. We will protect you, and you will force everyone to buy stuff through oil, through the dollar. And that singular contractual relationship between a group of elites who should have disappeared in Saudi Arabia many years ago, hundreds of years ago, who were medieval, with the modern day elites, is what has created war, is why young people, blacks and whites and brown people, go die to protect these people. And you've seen this massive income inequality. That's fundamentally what has taken place.
But that's also the problem, reaction, solution agenda, right? And divide and conquer. And we also had, of course, was it the Club of Rome who gave out the manifesto or the book, The Limits to Growth, which actually set the scene for the whole climate change agenda. And I know that you talk about climate change and you have some controversial views on that as well, and we want to get into that a little bit. What are your thoughts on climate change? Is that a UN Agenda 21 New World Order plan as well?
Well, anything I tell you right now is frankly not controversial. First of all, climate does change, period, okay? Two, CO2 is a greenhouse gas.
But is it man-made, though?
And greenhouse gases do increase temperature. The issue is, from a pure science standpoint, how much, okay? The question is not, is CO2 a greenhouse gas? The issue is how much, okay? And to figure out how much, you have to go to another set of truths, which are also non-controversial. No one will disagree with this. The sun is 6,000 degrees Kelvin, and about 340 watts per square meter of radiation come from the sun and hits the earth, okay? Now, the goal of the sun is to balance that energy, right? 140 watts per meter bounce off the atmosphere, and 200 watts per meter have to come into the atmosphere. So that 200 watts per meter needs to get dissipated. Well, how does it get dissipated? Well, it gets dissipated through convection, where you assume the surface of the earth is around 15 degrees. So just like a pot that you would put on a hot pot, if you assume that's 15 degrees, through convection, the rest of it leaves, okay? That convection phenomenon occurs between the interaction of two turbulent fluids, the ocean, which is a very complex turbulent fluid, and the atmosphere. Well, to model that mathematically and predict is if not impossible, it's absolutely impossible, because you can't solve the Navier-Stokes equation, okay? But the bottom line is, these climate models, if you even open up the IPCC report and read it, it's trash, because you find out there are 40 different models predicting ice melt in the Arctic. One model says 0% will melt, the other says 100%, and every flavor in between. That's not science. Okay, that's called indeterminacy.
For many years, they talked about global warming, but they kind of changed that now to global cooling or something in order to stay with the whole climate change narrative, right?
Yeah, look, the bottom line is this: climate will always change, okay?
But is it crucial? Is it very devastating at the moment?
The issue is, in all of these issues, the people in power create a fake problem and a fake solution because they can't solve the fundamental issues of infrastructure. If you can go back to this core principle, everything is easy to understand. So the issue is we need to lower pollution. Everyone will agree to that, okay? The Paris Accords allowed China and India to double their pollution. China, 11 billion metric tons to 22 billion. And instead of addressing, and the reason they want pollution is by 2030, China and India will have to buy carbon credits, and those will skyrocket in price. People are going to become trillionaires. That's what's really going on. But without addressing the clean water, clean air, clean food issue, they make the enemy CO2. And by making that the enemy, they can create a whole bunch of fake solutions to ultimately tax the American worker or the world worker or everyday people, because these carbon credits will add a little tax. So, and that's what they'll use to take another pound of flesh from the American worker, at least in the United States.
But why don't they talk about another kind of pollution, the dangers and health effects of rolling out 5G, which is a major issue at the moment?
Yeah, so I've been very busy with the campaign, and we just finished up the vaccine stuff, and before that GMO stuff. So I haven't had a chance to go into, I'm a double E, my undergraduate is in electrical engineering, so I can go through it, but I don't like to make comments on this stuff until I've had a chance to, go through it. I do take this stuff very seriously before I comment on it.
That's a very, very important topic, though.
Yeah, so, I will explore it. I have people starting to organize some literature for me so I can start understanding it.
You've called Harvard University a fake university. You talk about science fraud. You talk about academia frauds, and you call them paid prostitutes. But can we not put our trust in the educational system, academia and universities in particular?
Well, look, first of all, let's define what education is, right? There was a time when you as an individual got an education so you could learn something, skills that were tangible skills that you could use to further yourself, right? The more education you got, the more wealth you got, right? But it was very tangible. At some point, a disconnection took place, and people started thinking going to college was something you do because someone said you should go to college, okay? So out of that phenomenon, colleges started charging exorbitant sums of money, $50,000, $60,000 a year to go to school. Parents who before, decades before, generation before, no one would consider that. You typically worked and you saved up your money. You wouldn't go do a malinvestment like going to college if you didn't have the money, right? Without even seeing I'm going to get this job. I'm going to be a plumber. I'm going to be an engineer, right? You took these things seriously, but because of the brainwashing, parents got into this and they took loans. Well, why were they able to take loans? Because there's so much free money. Why is there free money? Because the student loan companies also got money from governments who basically were backing up those loans on the backs of the working people, right? So basically there's no accountability. Parents are taking loans, right? The loan companies are giving loans, and if they go bankrupt, no big deal. It's all covered. Okay, no. So parents take a couple $100,000 loans. They send their kid to school. The kid goes studied, something, right? Maybe studies transgenderism 101, or it could be a great class, could be a great major, but comes out, finds out he can't get any jobs in that. Okay, $200,000 in loans. The university has taken those $200,000. Okay, paid off their administrators handsomely, invested some of that in basically universities have endowments, which they invest in the stock market, reaping lots and lots of money. And the managers who maintain those endowments, like Harvard, for example, got the 6 money managers there, got paid $56 million in 1 year. Okay, so what you have going on is the universities have a front end called the university. That's why I called it a fake university. But the real operation they're running is a multi-billion-dollar not-for-profit, so they get the non-profit thing, hedge funds. That's what they're really running. And then they have people like Elizabeth Warren who sit there. They can spew out all their nonsense as though they care for working people, talk revolution, all this stuff, when they're essentially part of a Wall Street hedge fund. That's what they are. And if you look at a university like Harvard, 30% of the admissions are legacy admissions. You can be a dumb idiot, but if your father gave money, you get to go there, okay?
So how about all the other universities around America?
Well, many of them are like that. If you go to a technical university, there's less of that, like at MIT, but there's still other sets of corruption. Because you actually have to be able to solve a problem. You actually have to, I'm sure there's some level of cheating there. I'm sure there's people who get in without that. But relatively, it's not like you write an essay which is subjective and someone says, "Oh, beautiful essay, beautiful poem." It's all subjective stuff. The difference between the engineering worlds and the human, you solve a problem. There's a right answer and there is actually a wrong answer. If you get the wrong answer, the bridge is going to fall down. If you have the wrong answer, if you have the right answer, the bridge will stay up. A beautiful piece of essay may be right, but there's not a right essay and a wrong essay, right? It's highly subjective.
And science is based on theory, right?
Well, science is different than engineering. You can trust an engineer. You can't trust a scientist. What does a scientist do? He looks at something in nature. He comes up with a hypothesis. He does experiments. He gathers a bunch of data, and then he fits a line to a curve, and he says, "I think this is a model, okay, a law." Well, you don't know that's true until it's repeated. Engineers, when we build an airplane, we can't bullshit our way out of it if that airplane falls out of the sky. Or if a piece of software doesn't work, you have to look at your customer and you have to be able to fix it for them. Scientists can lie, engineers cannot. They can try, but someone is going to sue them or they're going to be out of work soon or their business will get shut down. Plumbers can't lie. They can't talk their way through saying I fixed something when you can see it's not fixed.
And you say the same thing basically about academia, that academia has been gagged.
Academia has become the oldest profession now in the world because it's all about chasing money. So if you want to say that that the world is going to end and CO2 is a pollutant, you pay people enough, they'll write papers for that because academics are different than the real scientists. Academics are essentially, the oldest profession, which is they chase money and they get grants and they get grants and they get grants.
Is that why you call them paid prostitutes?
I think I said it's the oldest profession, which is prostitution, But, that's what it is, It's what it's become. And you don't have to be that smart anymore to be an academic at MIT or Harvard. There was a time, only the brilliant guys got in and they were given freedom to do great science. Now it's about who knows how to be a politician and how to be a salesperson. So what you see happening over and over again is that the scientific method doesn't execute it. We do scientific consensus.
And you can pay people to say practically anything.
Well, yeah, that's what's happened. It's pay to play. Pay to play journalism, pay to play academia. It's become pay to play.
You claim to be the inventor of email, and a lot of people acknowledge you for this. But there are also those who speak against you and say that that is not the case. So please tell us, how did you invent email? What is your background?
Right. So first of all, we need to define what email is. Email is not the simple exchange of text messages. I've never said that I am the creator of electronic text messaging or electronic messaging. That goes back to Samuel Morse. The transfer or exchange of messages between electronic devices goes back to the telegraph. Email is what I created and what we all know and experience today, which is the system. Many people over the age of 40 will remember that there was a system that was used in many, many large organizations called the inter-office mail system. And this was really the vehicle, a paper-based system that was really used for social media communications in the inter-office environment. Many decades ago, and still today, many organizations still will use paper to some extent. But in 1978, when I invented email, in those days, there were two modes in this medical school that I worked in, which how people communicated. First was a landline telephone. We didn't have cell phones, right, at that time. And the other was the inter-office mail system. And that was a very complex system. It wasn't just a simple, a telegraph or the fax. It was a networked system using paper. And so if you looked in an office, let's say there were 1,000 offices. In Newark, where I created the first email system, there was it was a Rutgers University campus. There was 3 different locations: Newark, Piscataway, and New Brunswick, separated. And my supervisor, prior to my coming, had set up what was called a wide area network, a computer network, independent of the internet, which really didn't exist or any of that. What we're talking about is many organizations were starting to create their own computer networks. In fact, in a office environment, people were starting, this was the early stages where people would network computers together, okay? But separate from that, many of the offices always, if there was a doctor or researcher, always had a secretary. And the secretary would write the proverbial memo. And it was written on a typewriter and had a very specific format: to, from, subject, carbon copy, blind carbon copy. And typically on a secretary's desktop, there was a physical typewriter. She had the inbox, which is a physical metal or plastic box, an outbox, a drafts folder. She had paper clips. She had a thing called whiteout. Okay, so she would write a memo, and if there was an error, she would white it out. Sometimes she would do what's called a carbon copy. She would put one paper, put another piece of carbon paper, another paper, and she would write 2 memos, okay, which was the initial memo, and then she would carbon copy somebody else. Now, if she had to do 10 carbon copies, she would have to do 10 or 9 typings. You see what I'm saying? So, and then, the boss typically came, he would dictate to her, and she would the next day put it in the drafts folder. He would redline it, and then she would retype it. And let's say they were going to hire someone. Typically, you'd write a cover letter, which was a memo. You would attach someone's resume. That was an attachment with a paper clip. And then you would send it around the office, and people would provide comments. And that's how this was a system. It was a very complex system. So I was asked to convert that entire system into the electronic form. Now, in those old days, we were large mainframe computers. Mini computers were coming. And I had gone that summer into a very intensive military-like training program at NYU, where I learned 7 computer languages. I was one of the fortunate 40 kids who were selected to go to New York University, the Courant Institute of Mathematical Sciences, which is one of the most prestigious mathematical institutes in the world. And I was taught programming languages, 7 of them, graduated top of the class. And then when I finished, I had some high school courses left, and I started working at what was now known as Rutgers Medical School in the heart of Newark, New Jersey, predominantly African Americans. Most white people are still afraid to go to Newark, okay? But in that small medical college, I was afforded a huge opportunity. I was treated as an equal. That's my superior was 30 to 40 years older, but he said, look, I'll treat you as an equal. There are people 50 to 60 years working. I was a 14-year-old kid, would come in there with my briefcase, work until 2 a.m, and I wrote 50,000 lines of code in the Fortran language, which wasn't designed for text, in 8K of memory, to take all of these complex features and convert it to the electronic equivalent. And in fact, my customers were women who many of these old white men actually thought were not qualified to ever move from the typewriter to the keyboard. So there was clearly a lot of sexism and, classism, et cetera, because women in those days were only supposed to do 3 jobs: secretary, housewife, nurse, or teacher. And the thought of a woman ever using the keyboard of a computer was unheard of. But what email did was it literally liberated these women from their typewriter, to the keyboard. And I literally took this, physical office, and I put it into the virtual office. And I called that system email. So I wrote all the code, all of it. We're not just talking about simple little text messages, which is what some others can claim they were doing, but that's not email. And then I converted that into every feature we see in email today, because these women and the office doctors would not let them use it unless it had all those features. That was the number 1 requirement. I called it email because the operating system only allowed 5 characters. It was all in uppercase letters because the Fortran language, all variables were in uppercase. And then when I went to MIT, the freshman year, it was on the front page of the MIT newspaper. They highlighted 3 out of 1,041 kids, so clearly it was something important. And I had won one of the Westinghouse Science Awards before, which were considered like the baby nobles in the United States. But I was brought up to be a very humble Indian kid, never really thought much of it, even though it was featured in that MIT newspaper. But that in September, I believe, this is 1981 is when I went to MIT. In December of 81, 3 years after I'd created the first email system, I was at the president of MIT's home, and he said, and he had heard about what I'd done, and he said, Shiva, it's unfortunate that you cannot patent software, because he was on Reagan's, Science Advisory Council, and he said the Supreme Court didn't know what software was.
So you were not able to copyright it or patent it?
No, you weren't able to patent it. Mm-hmm. But said in 1980, which I didn't know, the Copyright Act of 1976 was amended to become the Computer Software Act of 1980, which allowed you to use copyright to protect software. Now, it's not perfect because copyright doesn't protect ideas or design. It protects a literal work only. So it wasn't as simple as simply putting a C with a circle, which some idiots on the internet have said, because these are 20-year-old, 30-year-old, frankly, foolish people who don't know history, right? And they just sort of barf up what others have told them. The reality is I had to send in all my code back and forth, and my parents weren't lawyers like Bill Gates's parents. And eventually on August 30th, 1982, I got the official copyright recognizing me as the inventor of email, the system as we know it today. So frankly, it's amazing that there is even a controversy. I wrote all the code, called it email, and have the first copyright. It's almost like, I don't know if you ever saw this movie, Kunta Kinte. You know, it's an old movie about a black African slave who comes to in chains, and the slave owners are trying to say, your name is Toby, you know, and he said, my name is Kunta Kinte. It's almost like I can see these people whipping me. You didn't invent email. Well, I have the code. No, you didn't invent email. I called it email. No, you didn't invent email. I have the copyright. It's unbelievable.
So why do you think people are criticizing you so much for it? Or at least some people are doing that.
Well, here's a reality, right? Think about where this was done. Okay, so there's, first of all, there's two levels of oppression and segregation here. First, the invention of email did not occur at MIT. Now, if you look at my MIT history, I came there in 81. I was on the front page for this. I was on the front page for inventing another technology called EchoMail. I was on the front page of MIT when I was accepted a Fulbright Scholar, many other things.
And you have 4 degrees from MIT, right?
I have 4 degrees from MIT, including my PhD. I'm a Fulbright Scholar. I've won probably every major, undergraduate award. So it's not like I'm a flunky. But this is where it, now remember, all of that was done within the MIT, umbrella, right? Because it's good to have a nice, good, dark Indian American minority, because now he's within the hallowed halls of the military-industrial complex, right? However, when in 2011, when my dear mom was dying of pulmonary fibrosis, horrible disease, she's the one, by the way, who found the newspaper article which said I could go to New York and take that course. She's the one who found this teacher, a mentor of mine in Newark, where I got that first job. She had saved all of my computer code, all of the tapes, everything. And the only journalist to date who is not prejudiced, who's not racist, who actually went through all of that was Doug Amiff, senior editor of Time Magazine, technology editor, and he wrote a beautiful article, said the man who invented email. Okay, this is November 11, 2011. 3 months later, the Smithsonian honored me. They said, oh my God, we never knew this material existed. And at a donation ceremony on February 16th, 2012, and a Washington Post reporter, an African-American reporter, wrote a beautiful story called Shiva Ayyadurai honored as the inventor of email. There's no controversy here. That's when the shit hit the fan. Because up until then, this was like a new skull was found in Africa, and it had to be destroyed. Because the liberal white historians had created the myth that a guy who looked like a nerd, glasses, almost like he came from a casting called Little Beard, that he had invented email, when all he had did, to his own admission, was 15 minutes of code change to simply add some code to FTP file transfer so you could add text to a bottom of a bulletin board. It would, at best, it was a caveman version of Reddit, okay? But they conflated what he had done because he fit the narrative, not a good-looking Indian guy who plays sports, and that doesn't fit the narrative of a nerd. Okay, you have to look like a nerd. And this is part of the other type of segregation. They say if you're a beautiful blonde-looking woman, you must be only sexy, right? You can't do other things. You can't be intelligent. If you come from the South and talk slowly, surely you cannot be smart. So the establishment creates all of these narratives. You have to be crazy looking like Einstein, then you're a scientist, mad scientist, right? Crazy artist. They have these ethos, but it's hard for them to understand that we as human beings can play multiple roles.
That's true, and it's the same for people thinking you have to be crazy or wacko to be on to have an alternative media channel, for example. Too much prejudice, huh?
Right. So you have these little boxes people do, because then it's easy to control people. So when it went into the Smithsonian, that's when it caused a problem, because now it was going into the establishment's record of history. So you see these liberal historians start calling me a fraud, a liar. Gawker media called me an asshole, a dick, right? Articles came out, this curry-stained Indian should be beaten and hanged,
Did they write that? Say that?
Yes, quote and quote, okay? And people went to my Wikipedia page, started destroying it. And if we tried to make changes, it was clear Raytheon, and I'll come to them, had started controlling my Wikipedia page. So what was going on was that year when my stuff went into the Smithsonian, Raytheon as a company in 2009 had bought a company called BB&N in Cambridge here, which is where this guy who did simple, at best, the caveman version of Reddit, and who was promoted as the inventor of email. Now, Raytheon, a multi-billion-dollar defense company, bought that company because they wanted to enter the cybersecurity market, right? Missile sales were going down. They wanted to enter spying on people's emails. Remember, that was right after the Patriot Act and all this kind of stuff. So to a defense company, they had rebranded their website. If you go to their website, Raytheon's website, it was the @ logo with this guy's picture on there, and they were the inventors of email. Now, that gives them, so imagine Raytheon competing against Northrop Grumman, other defense companies. They could say, oh, we are the ones who invented email, so that's why we should do your cybersecurity. So when my stuff went in, it was a huge blow to their brand, which was getting $270 million just from cybersecurity contracts. So that's why this hell was unleashed. Thousands of calls came into MIT where I was teaching a class, not charging, by the way, is the most popular elective. This guy should be fired. He's a fraud. One of the board members of MIT was also a board member at Raytheon, former head of the CIA.
But did you already talk about controversial topics at that time so that they wanted to, axe you in one way or the other?
Well, I have, I guess it's controversial if you stand, I'll go back to my history. There's a picture of me burning the South African flag on the steps of MIT. I had exposed corruption in India. I was a guy who exposed Monsanto, right?
And you were expelled from India because of trying to expose corruption there, weren't you?
Right.
Not allowed to go back or what?
Right. 2009, when I finished my PhD in 2007, took 2 years off because I was very interested in really understanding the integration of Eastern and Western medicine. Why was my grandmother, who was a poor village farmer, able to look at your face, understand how your body worked, practicing a traditional system of medicine? I saw her empirically heal people as a 4, 5, 6-year-old kid before I came to the United States. That's what motivated my interest in medicine. By the way, when I started working at that medical school, I was really interested in medicine, and I was doing research on applying computers to sleep data of babies to understand the onset of sudden infant death syndrome. So medicine was always my trajectory. Email in some ways came in the way, so I did both.
And your mother was a healer?
My grandmother.
Your grandmother, yes?
Yeah, my mother was a mathematician but the point is, to finish up the email thing, the reality here is that maybe if I was a white kid with blue eyes and blonde hair, and my last name was Einstein, I hate to say this, then I would be on every stamp in the world. But the reality was that email was not done at MIT. Email was not created at Silicon Valley. It was created by a 14-year-old, dark-skinned Indian-American kid in Newark. Now think about that, Newark, New Jersey.
And also before that, of course, we knew about Ray Tomlinson, right? Of ARPANET.
Yeah, he did nothing. The guy is a complete fraud. He's a fraud, you see?
Really?
What did he actually do? He did nothing. He simply wrote, he in fact admits it was a no-brainer. I wrote 15 minutes of code. I worked on this for years until 2 a.m. You can't create email in 15 minutes, okay? Email is the system. It's not the simple exchange of text messages. So the point here is if you think about it, was a 14-year-old kid in Newark, New Jersey, who created a technology which we have been all brainwashed to think that all great innovations must come from big universities, big military, and big industry, that it must come from the triangle of the military, industrial, academic complex. When the reality is all great inventions do not need that. In my case, it came from a different triangle of a loving family, amazing mentors, and the fact that I had good public school teachers who cared about me. They saw this good kid. They changed the rules so I could go work. It was quite amazing. I used to travel 30 miles into the heart of Newark to work. Most parents are afraid to send their kids down the street today. So that's where email took place. By the way, TV was created by a 14-year-old boy by the name of Philo Farnsworth. Now, he didn't have the skin issue, but he did have the issue that it was done outside of the military-industrial complex in a small farm in Franklin, Idaho.
Some young people are very brainy and quite the genius, huh?
Well, I would argue that young teenagers are in a mode of where they do not believe anything's not impossible, right? By the way, 6 months before I created email in 78, the guy who later started attacking me in 2011, a guy called David Crocker, is his name Crocker, interesting name, had written an article in December 1977 saying at this time, no attempt is being made, quote unquote, to create the electronic version of the interoffice mail system, because it is impossible. Okay? So these nerds were essentially trying to do simple text messaging at best. They were in their little hovels and their little cubicles. They probably looked down upon women called secretaries. But I, as a kid, didn't have any of those barriers, you see? I said, well, I can do this. And the reason they thought it was impossible was you had to write a system. In those days, it was all computer code. Imagine writing a system that could be used by everyone. And that's what a 14-year-old kid did.
Did people know how major email was going to get?
Yeah, and I did. There's an article that I wrote as a 16-year-old kid. I said email will one day be as big as a light bulb. So I could see the future. So I've been creating the future since I was a 14-year-old kid. And, I invented many other things. Currently, I've created a technology that can model molecular pathways on the computer. Mathematically, we can model different diseases long before we kill animals, long before we do test tube testing. And cytosolve is the name of that technology. It came out of my PhD work, is as important, as revolutionary as email. So the point is, email was done outside the bounds of the military-industrial complex. And as Eisenhower said, that it is the military-industrial complex that we have to fear, because they brainwash people to think that all great innovations must come from war. You see, you go kill people, and then, be happy you got Velcro and Tang, and which, by the way, didn't come out of the military. The reality was email was not a military application. It was a civilian application that was created in a health sciences institution, not in an institution of war, to help women. International Women's Day is coming up. It was women, a woman teacher who made sure I could work in that school, my mother, my grandmother, who inspired me to do medicine, and all these women secretaries. In many ways, email is really a testament to women, because, and this is a very nuanced aspect of this, which people probably don't understand. It was secretaries who were the slaves for these doctors. It was an elitist caste system in these universities, and they were just pounding away writing memos all day, and email freed them. So today we've all been there's an egalitarianism. We're all secretaries, right? We're all work on our email. That wasn't true in 1978, 79, right? That was relegated to the secretary, always a woman, 99% of the case a woman. So the point is, email, the question is, as one of my friends who runs he goes, the question is, why is there a controversy? Why did people call me all these names? Why did Gizmodo call me all these names? And the good news is, eventually we sued Gizmodo using Gawker Media, using Charles Harder.
And you won a court case for $750,000 settlement, huh?
And they were forced to remove those 3 articles. And then these same liberal elites started crying, oh my God, Shiva Ayyadurai is attacking free speech. Well, if anything, I've been a fighter for free speech. But the First Amendment does not protect lies. It's about truthful speech. So you say whatever you want, but if you say bullshit, people will have the right to come after you. So the issue everyone should ask is, why is there even a controversy? It's like, it's like I told you that kunte kinte, do people have to whip me? Hey, you didn't invent email. Well, I wrote the code. We don't care. Whip. You didn't invent email. Why? I called it email. We don't care. Whip.
Well, they certainly try and bring people down who talk about controversial topics.
There's no controversy, you see? The issue is, why is there a controversy? I wrote all the code. I was a guy, a 14-year-old, coined the term email to call that.
Well, if you are going against the official narrative, which you do on certain topics, maybe they want to bring you down, not give you the credit for being the inventor of email. That could be the case.
Yeah. So I think the larger interesting thing here is, I grew up in India, which had a caste system. So I have a very, I think, important perspective here, and people should listen to this perspective because it'll enable people to understand the truth of the situation. India had a caste system. The Brahmins, the educated priesthood was on top, who advised the kings, right? Academia, right? Advising the politicians, equivalent today. The kings then told the warriors, the military, what to do, go kill these people, etc. And the warriors protected the business people. And the way at the bottom were the Shudras, right? Today we call the working people, right? And so my family and our origin was we were considered untouchables. So, but the issue was that there was few enlightened people who knew better than everyone else, and only they could create, only they could innovate, right? They were the artists, right? They were the chosen people. So this is a very interesting concept.
It's like the same hierarchy we have here in the Western world, right? With the hierarchy in terms of the elite running the world and the politicians, and then we go down to the...
Well, you go down to the working people who are actually doing the work, who the actual producers up here are the parasites. So what's happened is that now, if you think about it at a very deeply fundamental level, what does it mean to be a human being? Whether you read the works of Adam Smith, whether you read the works of the liberal philosophers, even Karl Marx, even most people don't read it, it was about you are here, a human being. Through your work, through your labor, you create an object of your dreams, right? Whatever it is, a piece of art, email, right? Sculpture, etc. And the notion was that the greatest aspect of being human was that you are a divine spark of the creator, and out of you comes this creation, which is a manifestation of what you're connected to. Now, disconnecting that is what we're really talking about. That's the dehumanizing aspect, right? Disconnecting the human from the works of their labor and telling them that only a few people can do that creative work, or disconnecting them, making people become robots in some job, etc.
It's creating slave mentality, people working for the state.
It's creating a slave mentality. And the problem was that I think what really bothered these people was not, the facts are so obvious. I invented email. What bothers them is that I'm not willing to be a good nigga, okay? A good Indian, okay? That's what bothers them. And I use that word because, I can talk to that. Because what they bothers him is I'm not willing to shake my head and sit in the freaking lotus position. You see, the form of segregation, you see in India, he's supposed to shake his head, bow his head, and speak like Deepak Chopra very softly, or Gandhi, and say, you can beat the shit out of me.
You are quite a good friend of Deepak Chopra, right?
I know Deepak, but I'm saying that is the symbol, right? Deepak Chopra, people who talk softly and talk like this and say, talk like this and tell you to meditate. That's what you're supposed to be, right? Not be a hard-hitting guy who speaks the truth and is not willing to, is being relentless, right? That is what really bugs him. Why won't this guy go away? Why does he keep defending us? That's at the heart of this. He's not being a good Indian.
You're certainly not afraid of going for it, even publicly on television. There are many heated debates with you that people can find online as well. So that's also very interesting.
Well, yeah, you have, in America, you have, Al Sharpton is a guy who takes advantage of black people. You have guys like Howie Carr who take advantage of white people. You
were on his show. We saw a clip of you on that Howie Carr show.
Oh yeah, he's a complete scumbag. Yeah, he didn't put me on a show 20 times. He had this other idiot who's a complete moron who, by the way, photoshopped a picture of Trump. Then he calls me and puts a mugshot of my picture of a case that was outright dismissed, okay, knowing that while he was running ads for a guy who'd already paid him $250,000, okay? And so a guy like him is the Al Sharpton of white people, okay? So the white working class has clear anger. A guy like him points to pictures of dark people, just like Al Sharpton points to pictures of white people, and they keep poor blacks and poor whites fighting.
Yeah, but do you think it's a racist issue? Don't you just think it's because you're outspoken and controversial?
In my case, it's both, okay? You see, my case is both. That's why it's, my mother said in India you could be discriminated 7 times. She said in America 3 times. And she said, if the average white kid gets a B, you're going to have to get an A+. And that was always true. When I give you an example, when I grew up in New Jersey, I was a top student, and I think I was 12 or 13 years old, 15 years old, something like this.
You came to America at the age of what, 7?
7.
And you did not speak a word of English at that time, or what?
No, I spoke English in India. I speak as India. Remember, you have to understand, British were there 300 years. In many ways, people in India speak better English than people here. But anyway, I spoke English. But I spoke 3 languages. I spoke Hindi. I spoke my South Indian native tongue, Tamil, and English. And I think I spoke 1 other language because India is like Europe. You speak a lot of languages. But the point is that my journey here to the United States was interesting because, we used to go to high school, me and my sister. This was at a time when there were very few Indians here. The 4,000 student high school I went to, me and my sisters were only the 2 dark-skinned Indian people, right? They'd never seen Indians, right? And I remember teachers would have me come up in the front of the class and tell us about India. And I would tell them about forests and tigers, and people would just be glued thinking that India was just elephants and tigers and coal.
So in a way, you are a foreigner coming to America and realizing the American dream in a way.
Definitely. If you want to talk about a real American, that's me. I've gone through the entire journey.
Yeah, but all Americans, except for the Native American Indians, are foreigners from foreign descent.
Yeah, but the Native Americans also, the Yakuts, they came over the Bering Strait, or they may have come from South India, some of them up through. Anyway, I think the issue here is that the fact that when I came here, the 7th grade story is that they had an exam to figure out who was the best chemistry student. Okay, they wouldn't let me take that exam because they thought I'd win. So my mom and dad were so furious, they went and they ripped one to this chemistry teacher, and I ended up winning. But nothing has changed. When I ran for U.S. Senate last year against Elizabeth Warren, who was running as a Democrat and a Republican, they wouldn't let me on the debate stage, even though we qualified. We got all the signatures, our volunteers did. So what I've experienced, whether it was in 1975 or 2018, there's very little that has changed. Mm-hmm. On some level, very little has changed for people who are truly authentic and intelligent and who offer a serious challenge to the establishment. And that is why they're so afraid of people like me, because, they can't call me a flunky because I have 4 degrees from MIT, right? I've started the companies. I've made money. So it's not some woo-woo person here saying something about whatever, right? Illuminati or talking about aliens, right? You're looking at someone who's actually traversed the same journey that they've gone through, and now is essentially exposing and putting a mirror up to the oppression that they cause everyday people every day. That's what troubles them. In many ways, I'm a traitor to their class.
Well, in 2018, you were running as a pro-Trump Republican candidate for U.S. Senate against Democrat Elizabeth Warren.
I never voted in my life, ever, because I didn't like either party. I always thought of both parties as essentially yin and yang, or, Tweedledee and Tweedledum of the establishment. When Trump ran, what I found fascinating was he was being relentless, right? He was attacking Democrats and Republicans, right? He was a disruptor. And so I registered as an independent, voted for him, and then I was invited to the inauguration. I went, and then after that, I registered as a Republican. It was first to announce in February 2017 for the 2018 elections. Immediately after, you would think that the Republican Party would have embraced someone like me, right? I mean, they should, meritocracy, right? American dream right here. But the reality is they were so afraid, and they also have their own prejudices, were so afraid that they put an idiot to run against me in the Republican Party, a guy who is a numbskull, frankly. His name, we call him Dirty Deal, had photoshopped a picture with Trump. There's 3 hands in the picture, okay? We had forensically done, expose this, and this guy stole jewelry when he was a kid, a complete nut, okay? But the establishment loved him because they wanted to control opposition, to lose to Elizabeth Warren. So we ran as independents, and we got 100,000 votes. Now, that may seem like a small number, but 5 times more than any U.S. Senate independent candidate. Most people run either Republican or Democrat. It is very difficult to run as an independent.
Now you are an independent. You lost the last election, or didn't get a seat in the Senate, and now you're running again in 2020.
We're running as a Republican this time.
As a Republican this time.
I ran in 2018 initially as a Republican, realized that they were never going to allow me on the Republican ballot ticket, so we ran as an independent, and we devastated Elizabeth Warren. The reason she took that DNA test was we had probably thousands of signs all over Massachusetts which said only the real Indian can defeat the fake Indian. It was a phenomenal ad campaign. It was really not about race. It was really exposing her hypocrisy.
Well, for many of our international viewers who may not know who Elizabeth Warren is, unless they have been following U.S. local politics, she was the Democratic candidate that you were up against in 2018. And now you are running as an independent Republican candidate for U.S. Senate.
Yeah, all they need to know is fake Indian internationally. That's what they should know her as.
But why politics, though? Why politics at all? Isn't this political two-party system just a mere reality show? A game in order to distract people, the voting public, in order to make them believe that their vote actually matters?
So it's all about intention, Buddha, who's one of the, very smart gentlemen who lived at one time, he said it's all about intention, okay? So it's about what you do. You could have a knife in your hand and someone could see you go put that knife into someone. Well, it could be a surgeon who's doing it to maybe take out something horrible, or it could be a murderer, right? And Buddha gave this example. So it really depends on intention. So what is my intention in doing this? First of all, I don't need to do it. I'm a full-time scientist and an inventor.
Why are you doing it?
Well, because I made a promise when I was 12 years old, a deeply spiritual promise. In 1975, I went back to India after living in the United States for about, 5 years. I came in 1970, 75. My grandmother was very ill, so me and my mom went back. And I went back to my village again. And that's when I realized the stark difference of how people lived. I said, oh my God, I took it for granted. My aunt lived in a little hut. My grandparents lived in a very small place. They had nothing. And when I was leaving that time back to the United States, my grandparents came to the train station to see me off. And they were the most loving people I'd ever seen. They would do anything for me. And there was this sacred bond. These were very deeply spiritual people. My grandmother was a village shaman. And I saw both my grandparents crying, and I started to cry, and I realized, Jesus Christ, these people have done everything for me. And if I don't do something for them, meaning them working people, my grandparents would work 16 hours in the fields with leeches on them, in the paddy fields, or for those working people that I grew up in New Jersey, people taught me how to paint homes or landscape or play baseball.
So you're doing it for your heritage or your ancestors?
Well, I did it for people who worked their butts off. And it was basically this deep conviction that I had. And I still remember that scene, that I realized that, I don't know where it came from, that I would be a parasite if these people are living in huts. I'm going back on a jet plane to the United States. And if I don't make something of myself, that as a human being, that I would be a parasite. And I can't explain it, but it was this deep recognition that I owe something to these people and to the working people. And it was a notion that people who create something, someone who makes this, right? You start having a big reverence for people who live in the nuts and bolts of life, the plumber, the electrician, the nurse, engineers. We have to live in reality. Lawyers and bankers do not. They move nonsense, right? That's why Socrates hated the written word. They move around word forms, right? They can manipulate people.
But the same thing is happening in politics. They excel, the politicians excel in manipulation and smart talk in a way, don't they? It is a big reality show game, isn't it? When we really go.
Well, it depends. In the Hindu tradition, it is said that we live in the age of the Kali Yuga, right? This is the age of all illusion, okay? Right will be presented as wrong and wrong will be presented as right. But it is in this time, in the Hindu mythology, it says the earth goes through the universe goes through 4 different ages. The Satya Yuga, which is known as the golden age, the Treta Yuga, the silver age, and I forget the bronze age, what it's called, I think Dwarpa Yuga, and then now the Kali Yuga. And then it restarts again. But in the Kali Yuga is when you have the greatest evil exists, greatest illusion, but you also have the greatest chance for emancipation at a deep level. And there's some, you can find out if this is true or not, but I think that's where we live right now. So for some guy like me, a scientist and inventor, to go into this swamp, essentially it's a shithole, okay, is in some ways the right thing to do.
And that's why you have to play the game also with this Elizabeth Warren and go against her, really. What do you think your chances are of winning this time?
Well, it's not against Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren was in 2018. Mm-hmm. She has her seat until 2024. She ran for president also. The guy that I'm running against, interesting enough, his name is Malarkey, okay? Which means lies, okay? Actually, his name is Markey. We call him Malarkey. And the other guy would be Joe Kennedy, Joe Kennedy.
From the Kennedy family.
Yeah, the elite Kennedy family who think they're the anointed ones to run politics and they can, own everything left and right. So here's a kid, by the way, so it's me as the Republican candidate. Whoever emerges out of Joe Kennedy and Ed Malarkey, I'll compete against. Now, you have to understand, this guy Malarkey has been in the Congress for nearly 50 years. Joe Kennedy, came from a nice, beautiful private school. Then he went to Harvard Law School. Then he got a nice job as a DA. I mean, his whole life has been beautifully planned out for him. And he has a $50 million trust fund. Never has worked a day really in his life. So this election is going to be interesting because it's really about a guy like me who's really like one of you, right? A worker who produces versus parasites, lawyers. Lawyers are the parasite class, period. Okay? Maybe there's some nice guys, but that's irrelevant. They are the class of people who create thought forms, right? They're the ones who create artifice. They're the ones who create regulations. And that strata of people are the ones who manipulate words. They don't live in reality. They never have to. So think about a courtroom. You could have a criminal and it's a theater. Most of the litigators think they're actually actors. They're failed actors, many of them.
Maybe they are, like some presidents, for example.
Right.
Or senators even. We saw Schwarzenegger in California.
You have the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. I'm running as a Republican. To me, it doesn't matter what these parties are. It's basically you're driving a Ford or a Chevy or a Hyundai or a Toyota, right? And I think most people, this dialectic is a Republican, Democrat, they don't mean much. Trump is really not a Republican or a Democrat. He's Trump. Now, he hijacked the Republican Party. Okay, that's what he did. And he did it very deftly. But here in Massachusetts, the two Democrats are basically two lawyers. And the choice will be, do you want to vote for someone who actually has done stuff, solves problems, or someone who creates problems? You want to vote for someone who creates the future, who created email, who creates Cytosolve, who creates things, or do you want to be in the past, people who want to control the future?
Well, just before we end on a lighter note, and certainly more private and personal and very entertaining, a lot of our audiences may know you from being married to, an American national treasure, Fran Drescher from the popular sitcom The Nanny. That certainly must have been quite an experience for you. What was it like being married to Fran Drescher? And she's from a totally different world from where you come from, academia and science.
Well, I never even knew The Nanny, by the way. Fran came up to me and saw me speak at an event, and she, it's all on the TV. She said she made a beeline for me. I never even saw The Nanny. I didn't even know what the show was because I don't watch a lot of TV. It was only many years later that I ever saw the show. And to me, it was funny because that's how Fran is in real life. So I didn't really see the acting. She didn't like I said that. But look, I learned a lot from Hollywood. What I learned was there are two types of people in Hollywood: celebrities, people who got there, they got lucky, a lot of insecurity. For every, one comedian or actor who makes it, there's 1,000 others who didn't make it because they didn't know the right person. And then there are real actors who train in their craft, like a guy like Pierce Brosnan, okay, whom and his wife became a good friend of mine. Very different people, because these people actually worked at it, but those are rare. Most of the people in Hollywood have golden handcuffs because, they came there to be celebrities, to be a star, right? Not to do a great piece of work. So you have this big bifurcation in Hollywood, and a lot of the people there have, as I mentioned, a massive amount of insecurities because they may have done something at some point and that career wanes. So they're constantly trying to remain relevant. And then there's the people who just keep getting work over and over and over again because they're just great actors. They treat it like carpentry. Daniel Day-Lewis is an example. He does 3 films, a film every 6 years, but that's what I'm saying. It's very different, not that different from academia, people going and learning weird stuff and then thinking they're very smart, the educated, vulnerable elites, versus people who actually get skills. And this is the bifurcation we're seeing in the world,
But she certainly made it really, really big on television and has had a great career in her life, also internationally. What was it like for you coming from a totally different world and from academia, really, and what you've gone through as a scientist, basically, to meet somebody like her? Well, is she as full of fun and lively and spunky as we were led to believe?
Well, I guess what I can tell you is that it is not that different than the academic world. That's what I'm trying to tell you. What I'm trying to tell you is you have real people with real craft, and then those people who have a great deal of insecurity there. So it's not that different, believe it or not. So to me, I wasn't that moved by a lot of this. To me, I was more interested in meeting someone who wanted to potentially change the world and help things and those kind of things. That's what's always moved me. I've been around a lot of different things. Look, when I went to India, you talked about this, right? I was in India in 2009. I was appointed by the Prime Minister of India to run the largest innovation center, given a huge, beautiful bungalow, treated like royalty, appointed as an additional secretary in the Indian government. My father-in-law at that time said, "Shiva, shut your mouth. Will one day become Minister of Science and Technology." But that's not who I am. I'm not moved by this stuff. What moves me is that promise that I made as a 12-year-old kid.
But certainly it was a different direction for you to go, huh? Being with somebody like her who's so fascinating in a totally different way.
Well, what I'm trying to say is, I never looked at it that way. I think I never looked at it that way. That's what I'm trying to say.
But it must have been a great, an interesting experience, fascinating experience in your life.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, but to me, the best experiences I've had I got to tell you I've had a very richer experience with the people, when I was growing up in Jersey, a Yugoslavian painter who taught me how to paint, beautifully, right? Or a landscaper who taught me how to cut grass well, people who do an honest day's job. And those are who my real friends are. So I think it may be hard for you to, it's easy to be on the outside and see this stuff, but ultimately the people that I find fascinating are people who get up every day, actually go do something, and build something, create the future, make something, and have skills. To me, that's what I find amazing. A guy who can look at your car, a mechanic, and hear something and figure something out and fix things. This is real talent, people who can figure stuff out. The other stuff is a lot of, frankly, noise. It's not real. You talked about illusion.
Well, there are so many things to talk about and so many topics we could get into and discuss, but unfortunately we are out of time for today. But we can continue and do that again on another show in the future, perhaps. But for now, please tell people how they can contact you, your contact info, or how people can get to know more about your work and your political campaign.
Yeah, one of the things, since you guys are into the health and et cetera, there's a movie that I'm in called Poisoning Paradise, which was produced by Pierce Brosnan. It won 14 major film awards. It's really about what happened on the island of Kauai, the destruction to the native Hawaiians by the big agrobiotech. It's interesting, Pierce sneezes and all the major magazines will cover him. This won 14 film awards.
How can people find perhaps a link or something to that particular film?
Yeah, you can. It's on iTunes. It's called Poisoning Paradise. I'm the chief scientist in the movie. People should go check it out. If people want to know more about my campaign, you can go to Shiva for Senate, Shiva numeral4 Senate.com, or you can go to vashiva.com where you can find more stuff about me. V as in Victor A, Shiva.com.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Shiva Ayyadurai, for being on Age of Truth TV.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for watching. You can support us by clicking onto our website, ageoftruth.tv. And please like our videos, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell for notifications. Your support is greatly appreciated. On behalf of the Age of Truth TV team, we thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you again soon.